Portugal, Western Europe. A corner of the continent that, for much of the 20th century, seemed frozen in time. While other nations were rebuilding their democracies after the Second World War, here, along this narrow Atlantic strip, the shadow of a dictatorship stretched ever further. It all begins in 1926, when a military coup puts an end to a fragile democracy. From that chaos emerges a man, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. A university professor of economics, reserved, deeply Catholic, with a worldview anchored in order, discipline, and tradition. In 1933, Salazar formally establishes the Estado Novo, the new state, an authoritarian regime that would rule Portugal for the next 4 decades. The Estado Novo is built upon 3 pillars: Deus, Patria e Familia, God, fatherland, and family. A motto that permeates every corner of the country. The Catholic Church becomes one of the regime's greatest allies. Censorship is institutionalized. Books, newspapers, even songs, are carefully reviewed by the state apparatus. Dissident publications are banned, critical writers are monitored or silenced. In schools, obedience is taught, in the streets, fear is breathed. The regime's political police, the dreaded PIDE, Polícia Internacional e de Defesa do Estado, keeps watch over students, workers, teachers, journalists. They infiltrate meetings, intercept letters, interrogate suspects without the need for evidence. A mere accusation of subversion is enough to disappear. Some are taken to prison, others, into exile, many, into silence. And yet, daily life goes on. The cafes of Lisbon and Porto murmur with quiet conversations. Families gather around the state radio. Religious processions mark the rhythm of the calendar. Portugal remains an agrarian, conservative nation where decisions are made in the offices of power and not to be questioned in the public square. During the 1950s and 60s, the world changes. Europe recovers, rock and roll shakes social norms, young people march for civil rights. Portugal, however, stands still. Illiteracy reaches alarming levels. Poverty, especially in the countryside, is chronic. Progress seems like a train that never stops here. But there is a fracture line growing ever more unbearable: the colonies. While other European powers dismantle their empires, Portugal insists on keeping its own. Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, East Timor. Salazar does not call them colonies but overseas provinces, inseparable Portuguese territory, part of the nation's body. That stubbornness comes at a price: war. From 1961 onwards, Portugal becomes entangled in 3 simultaneous colonial fronts. In the African jungles, thousands of young Portuguese soldiers fight in conflicts they barely understand. Over 800,000 men are sent overseas during the 1960s and 70s. Many never return. Others come back marked by violence, impotence, and futility. In Portugal, these wars are silenced. No public debates, no protests allowed. Yet discontent slowly seeps in, through private conversations, through letters sent from Luanda or Bissau, through the gestures of mothers who bid farewell to their sons with a mix of pride and resignation. In 1968, Salazar suffers an accident and becomes incapacitated. He is replaced by Marcelo Caetano. Younger but equally fearful. He promises a Marcelist spring that never comes. Censorship is only slightly eased. Repression continues. The colonial wars, far from subsiding, intensify. By the late 60s and early 70s, exhaustion grows. Some sectors of civil society begin to organize, timidly. Intellectuals, students, artists. Underground left-wing groups. But the true change begins to take shape within the army itself. The officers who have fought in Africa are not professional revolutionaries. They are captains, lieutenants, sergeants who have lived firsthand the futility of an endless war. They have seen their men die. They have watched their country bleed while the regime refuses to change course. And they begin to talk among themselves. From those conversations, something new emerges, the seed of an organization, a secret network slowly taking form. They are men trained in discipline, but not in submission. They believe in Portugal, but not in dictatorship. They know weapons, yet they long not to use them. In Lisbon's cafes, the rumor of a conspiracy begins to spread. Some officers are watched by the PIDE. Others meet in houses far from the city. They exchange ideas, draft manifestos, debate strategies. They do not seek a bloody revolution. They do not wish to repeat the wars they have endured. But they are determined to change the fate of their country. This is the beginning of the Movimento das Forças Armadas, the MFA. A set of initials that, for now, means little to most, but will soon become synonymous with hope. Meanwhile, life carries on. Bread is bought each morning. Radios repeat government bulletins. Television broadcasts official speeches, processions, festivals. And yet, something has changed. Beneath the surface of routine, the unthinkable is being prepared. It is April 1974. Spring is near, but no one can imagine that, within days, Portugal will cease to be what it has been for almost 50 years. Portugal, 1973. While the regime maintains an appearance of normality on the surface, discontent seeps through the seams of the state. It does not come from the great political parties, nor from the trade unions, still banned, nor even from the intellectual elite. It comes from the army. From those who were meant to uphold the regime. And are no longer willing to do so. They will be called the captains, though not all of them hold that rank. Some are majors, others lieutenants. But all share a common experience, the colonial wars. They have all been there. They have felt the humidity of the African jungles, the tension of patrolling hostile villages, the frustration of carrying out absurd orders. They have seen their comrades die, they have returned home with questions no one can answer. They were not raised to question authority. They were taught to obey. But when you no longer understand why you are fighting, and when the government you represent no longer answers to its people, obedience begins to crack. Something starts to break. In August 1973, that unease begins to take shape. A group of officers meets in secret. It is a discreet gathering, no grand speeches, no flags. Only men weary of a war they no longer wish to fight, and of a country that refuses to change. They organize. They draw lines of contact. They give themselves a name, E Movimento das Forças Armadas, the MFA. They are not professional revolutionaries. They have no detailed plan of government. But one thing is clear, the regime must fall. And it will not fall from the outside, but from within. That is why the MFA is so dangerous to the dictatorship, because it does not come from exiles, or from underground communists, or from student agitators. It comes from the very heart of the system, the army itself. The MFA structure is horizontal, almost without hierarchy. It is built on trust. Each member answers to the collective, not to a single leader. Meetings take place in private homes, in moving cars, in empty cafes. Sometimes they use false names. At other times, they communicate through coded phrases. Among the members of the MFA, there are ideological differences, of course. Some lean to the left, others are more conservative. Some dream of a parliamentary democracy, others imagine a socialist republic. But on the essential point, they agree, the dictatorship must end, and it must be done without bloodshed, if possible. While they plan, the country remains unchanged. Television broadcasts singing contests. Newspapers speak of stability. Official bulletins repeat hollow phrases about order and progress. But in the margins of the system, decisions are being sharpened. The MFA begins to gather support. They recruit military units, trusted officers, entire regiments that, when the time comes, will be ready to move. The Portuguese armed forces are not homogeneous. There are sectors loyal to the regime, yes, but also many undecided. The MFA works quietly, convincing them one by one. Sometimes arguments suffice. Other times, the emptiness is argument enough. By the end of 1973, the movement already has an initial plan. Several scenarios are considered: a gradual uprising, a swift strike in Lisbon, or even an intervention that draws the masses into the streets. Everything is weighed, everything doubted. But one thing is certain, the moment is drawing near. On the 14th of March, 1974, the regime makes a mistake. It attempts to suppress a movement of junior officers protesting against changes in military promotion law. The government's response is clumsy and authoritarian. What began as an administrative complaint becomes a political spark. Many of the captains who had hesitated until then decide there is no turning back. The MFA intensifies its preparations. Lists are drawn up of the units that will take part in the insurrection. Routes for the tanks are mapped. Objectives are defined: the airport, the radio, television, key ministries, the headquarters of the political police. Everything is calculated to the millimeter. Success depends on speed, on surprise, and on the absence of gunfire. One of the most delicate points is communication. If the MFA is to coordinate dozens of military units across the country, it needs a clear, recognizable signal, one that will not arouse suspicion. They find it in music. The plan is to use songs as coded signals. It will not be a direct message, but a melody, a song broadcast on the radio that the officers will recognize as the call to action. The first chosen is E Depois do Adeias, performed by Paulo de Carvalho, a melancholic song with ambiguous lyrics. It had represented Portugal at the Eurovision Song Contest only weeks earlier. No one in the regime would suspect a thing. When it plays on the radio, it will mean that everything is in motion, that the units must prepare. The second signal will be more symbolic: Grandela, Via Morena by Zeca Afonso, a song banned by the regime, a hymn to equality and brotherhood among the people. When that song is broadcast on Radio Renascença, it will mean that the troops must take to the streets and begin the operation. It is a plan as simple as it is poetic, a revolution that will begin with music. On the 24th of April, 1974, in the evening, the members of the MFA confirm that everything is ready. The units are positioned. Contacts have been alerted. The men are prepared. The radio stations have been infiltrated. At 22:55, the first signal sounds. On the radio, E Depois do Adeias flows naturally. No one seems to notice anything unusual, just another song in the late-night broadcast. But for the conspirators, it means the clock has started ticking. The final pieces fall into place. Some officers spend the night awake, others pretend routine. At 0:20, on the 25th of April, the second signal plays. Grandela, Via Morena fills the airwaves of Radio Renascença. The song is banned, yet it plays in full. Clear, calm, with its slow marching rhythm and deep voice. There is no turning back. The MFA moves. Through that night, Lisbon begins to fill with tanks, jeeps, and soldiers. The radios fall silent or come under the movement's control. Television suspends its programming. The MFA occupies bridges, crossroads, strategic points. There are no clashes. In most cases, the soldiers do not even raise their weapons. When people wake up, they do not quite understand what is happening. Some believe it is another authoritarian coup. Others are afraid. But they soon realize there is no repression, no violence, only young soldiers, firm yet calm. They do not shout. They do not push. They arrest no one. And among the soldiers, on the barrels of their rifles, carnations begin to appear. In the early hours of the 25th of April, 1974, Lisbon sleeps under a pale moon and a lightly clouded sky. The streets are almost empty. Only the occasional car crosses the deserted avenues. In the houses, the radios are silent. Television has ended its broadcast for the night. Everything seems calm. But beneath that calm, something is moving. At 0:20, the banned song plays on Radio Renascença. The voice of Zeca Afonso begins to sing, Grandela, Via Morena, Terra da Fraternidade. It is the second code. The final signal. The men of the MFA know what it means. It is time to move. Tanks roll quietly out of the barracks. Military lorries head towards the city center. Jeeps carrying young soldiers cross Lisbon with clear orders. Occupy without provoking, advance without firing. The orders are strict: avoid casualties. Do not open fire except in direct self-defense. And wherever possible, persuade rather than confront. The first units move towards strategic points, the headquarters of public television, the airport, the communication centers, the Ministry of the Interior. Others surround the buildings of political and military power. There is no immediate resistance. Some regime officers, taken by surprise, try to make calls that never go through. The lines have already been cut. By 3 a.m., the Portuguese capital is no longer under the control of Marcelo Caetano's government. It is in the hands of young captains. Many under 35, who only weeks earlier saw themselves as mere cogs in the military machine. In some neighborhoods, residents hear the rumble of heavy engines. At first, they think it's a routine operation. But when they look out of their windows, they see tanks, armed soldiers on street corners. Rumors spread quickly. A military coup, another one. Will it be like the others? Will it be more of the same? But there's a difference. No curfew is declared, no shots are fired, no orders shouted through loudspeakers. There are no arrests, no raids. On the radio, an unfamiliar voice breaks through clearly: Arqui, posto de comando do movimento das Forças Armadas. Pedimos a todos os habitantes que mantenham a calma. Isto é uma recal pacífica. O objetivo do MFA é libertar o povo português da opressão. This is the command post of the armed forces movement. We ask all citizens to remain calm. This is a peaceful action. The MFA's goal is to free the Portuguese people from oppression. And at that moment, something changes. What seemed like another military maneuver reveals itself as something deeper, more human, cleaner, braver. It is not a struggle for power among elites. It is not a clash between generals. It is something else. It is a revolution. By dawn, Lisbon wakes in silence, but soon the murmur becomes conversation, and the conversation, emotion. The first passers-by leave their homes. They observe the soldiers cautiously, but the soldiers do not stop them. They simply watch, some even smile. An elderly woman, wrapped in a grey coat and carrying her shopping bag, approaches a young soldier, barely 20 years old. She asks him, "What's happening, my son?" He replies softly, "We're making Portugal free, madam." Elsewhere in the city, a flower seller walking towards the square with a basket of red carnations, the most common flowers of the season, sees a group of soldiers beside a tank. She stops. Watches silently. One of them looks at her. Without a word, she takes a carnation and hands it to him. The soldier accepts it gratefully, and in a spontaneous gesture, places it inside the barrel of his rifle. Another follows his example. Then another. Within minutes, the image multiplies. The gun barrels no longer look like weapons. They look like vases. The flower seller offers more carnations to the soldiers. Some civilians join in, coming down from their homes with flowers in hand. Children run between the tanks. There is something profoundly human unfolding, a revolution without violence, a transformation without bloodshed. In the barracks, confusion reigns. Some units are unsure whether to join or remain loyal to the government. The MFA, skillfully, sends envoys to negotiate. They demand no surrender, only reflection. We are not here to kill. We are here to change. At the government headquarters, Marcelo Catano takes refuge in the Carmo barracks, one of the last loyal strongholds. But it is surrounded. Crowds begin to gather outside. There is no violence, only tension. Hours pass. The MFA officers attempt to persuade the commanders inside. They refuse to storm the building by force. By mid-morning, thousands of people are in the streets. Typewritten leaflets circulate with the movement's declarations. Spontaneous chants echo. The tanks no longer advance. They halt, as if not to disturb the moment. On the radio, a voice announces, "O regime caiu. O pode ser entrega governo provisorio." The regime has fallen. Power will be handed over to a provisional government. At 4:30 p.m., Marcelo Catano formally surrenders. He insists that power be transferred not to a young officer, but to someone of higher rank. General Spinola is chosen. The surrender is signed. Catano is escorted out of the building. There are no jeers, no stones thrown, only silence. Then, a restrained applause. As if the people still cannot quite believe what has happened. But it is real. Portugal has changed its regime in less than 24 hours. Without firing a single bullet at civilians. Without a single death in direct combat. With flowers, songs, and conviction. The 25th of April, 1974. Night falls, the streets of Lisbon are still filled with people. Some wander aimlessly, as if trying to make sure that what they witnessed during the day wasn't a dream. Others sing, many cry. There are no riots, no looting. Only a quiet euphoria, as though the emotion were too immense to be expressed in words. The radio repeats the statements from the armed forces movement. The regime has been overthrown. Marcelo Caetano has been escorted out of the country. The political police, the feared Pied, has been dismantled. The people are urged to remain calm, to unite, to rebuild. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Portugal wakes up without a dictatorship, but a revolution does not end with the fall of a dictator. It only begins, and the days following the 25th of April will be dizzying. The first thing that appears is freedom, raw, intense, overflowing, freedom to speak, to gather, to shout aloud what for years could only be whispered. Newspapers, liberated from censorship, publish articles that would have been unthinkable only weeks before. New publications emerge. The airwaves fill with diverse voices. The silence is broken. But freedom also brings chaos. The streets overflow with demonstrations, with flags, with placards. Students occupy universities. Workers form grassroots committees in factories. Women organize feminist movements. The country's neglected interior demands attention. Rural communities, silenced for decades, begin to speak out. Political parties, banned under the regime, reappear or are newly formed. The Portuguese Communist Party, led by Álvaro Cunhal, returns from exile. The Socialist Party, headed by Mário Soares, rises with strength. Far-left movements also emerge, Maoist, Trotskyist, each with its own vision of the Portugal to be born. And not all of them agree. In the first months after the revolution, the MFA establishes the National Salvation Junta, made up of military officers who assume temporary control of the country. But they do not intend to rule forever. They know their role must be transitory. Their aim is clear, to lead Portugal towards democracy. Yet the path will be anything but straight. The Pied is dismantled. Its archives, in many cases, burnt. Some of its members try to flee. Others are arrested. Many vanish into anonymity. The people demand justice, but there is also fear of revenge. Not everyone wishes to see a violent purge. The revolution has been cleaned so far, and the MFA leaders are determined to keep it that way. Meanwhile, in the colonies, the news from Lisbon sets off an earthquake. The independence movements in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and other territories know that their moment has come. The new provisional government has no desire to continue the colonial wars. In less than 2 years, Portugal brings an end to its overseas empire, an empire that had lasted more than 5 centuries. But the process is far from simple. There are internal struggles in the colonies, resistance from Portuguese settlers, especially in Angola and Mozambique. Thousands of retornados, those returning from the colonies, come back to Portugal stripped of everything, searching for a place in a country that is no longer the one they once knew. They arrive in a free nation, yes, but also an uncertain one. Across the mainland, the atmosphere is tense. 11 provisional governments follow one another in less than 2 years. Internal conflicts between MFA factions, political parties, trade unions, and social movements create a sense of instability. Some fear that Portugal might become a communist dictatorship. Others believe the revolution has not gone far enough. In 1975, critical moments unfold. Land occupations sweep through the Alentejo. There are massive nationalizations of banks, telecommunications, energy. Uprisings are attempted. Coups fail. Counter-coups arise. The struggle for the soul of the revolution is fierce. The Verão Quente, the hot summer of 1975, marks the height of the tension. And yet, amid the noise, something grows: democratic awareness. The Portuguese, after half a century of imposed silence, are learning to live in freedom. They learn to disagree, to negotiate, to vote. In April 1975, the first free elections are held for a constituent assembly. Voter turnout exceeds 90%. People queue for hours, elderly, young, peasants, soldiers, all with the same purpose: to decide their country's future with a ballot and a box. The result, a new constitution. Progressive, forward-looking, profoundly shaped by the revolutionary spirit. A constitution that enshrines social, labor, and cultural rights. That declares the will to build a fairer society. But it also bears the scars of the process. There is mistrust between factions. Fear of the extremes. Wounds still open. In 1976, with the ratification of the new constitution, Portugal finally enters democratic normality. A civilian president is elected. A legitimate government is formed. The MFA dissolves as a political force. Many of its members return to the barracks. Others, to civilian life. And yet, the spirit of April endures. The 25th of April, 1974 was not an isolated day. It was the beginning of a long, complex, and contradictory process. A revolution that not only toppled a regime but redefined what it meant to be Portuguese. A revolution made not with violence, but with flowers, not imposed through fear, but carried by conviction. Not demanding blood, but dignity. Years later, Portugal would look back and realize that the Carnation Revolution was not just a moment in history, but a point of departure, a seed that bore fruit: democracy, rights, freedom. More than 50 years have passed. Lisbon has changed. Portugal has changed. It is no longer a country closed in on itself, ruled by fear, condemned to silence. It is a democracy. Imperfect, like all others. Fragile at times. But alive. Open. Free. And yet, every 25th of April, something endures. The streets fill with flowers. In the squares, on balconies, in the clenched fists of children, carnations appear. Red, like the ones a flower seller once handed to a soldier, without realizing she was making history. It is Freedom Day. And it is not celebrated as a mere anniversary, but as a moment of reunion with dignity. Parades, speeches, songs, exhibitions. But also silences. Memories. Tears. For freedom, when denied for so long, never becomes routine. In schools, the 25th of April is taught. Children are told that one day Portugal changed without gunfire. That a group of captains chose not to kill, but to persuade. That the tanks did not crush the people, but freed them. That there was music, and flowers, and hope. The protagonists have grown old. Some have died. Others still walk the streets, quietly, without boasting. They are men who did not seek power, but change. Men who knew that the homeland is not a government, nor a flag, nor an anthem. But the people. Its people. In television archives, the black and white images still move the heart: young men in berets. Women embracing soldiers, tanks adorned with flowers, crowds singing songs once forbidden. An entire people pouring into the streets not to protest, but to give thanks. The song Grandela Via Morena continues to be heard, at concerts, official events, demonstrations. It has become more than a song. It is a statement of principles. A promise. A legacy. Grandela Via Morena, terra da fraternidade, o povo e quem mais ordena, dentro de ti, o cidade. That line, the people are the ones who command the most, remains a compass. In times of crisis, disillusionment, populism, and dangerous nostalgia, Portugal remembers that it was able to free itself without bloodshed. That it needed no martyrs, no violence. That it was possible to make a revolution without hatred. But it also knows that freedom does not preserve itself. That it is not enough to have conquered it once. It must be protected. It must be taught. It must be lived. That is why each 25th of April is not only a celebration, it is a reminder. Of what was. Of what might have been. And of what can still be lost, if forgotten. The new generations did not live through the Estado Novo, nor experience censorship, nor see the Pied in action. They were not in the African trenches, nor did they hear coded signals over the radio. But they inherit something far more precious, its memory. And in that legacy, the carnation becomes more than a flower. It is a symbol of resistance without violence, of courage without arrogance, of firmness without brutality, of revolution without fear. The red carnation once placed in the barrel of a rifle now blooms in the gardens of a republic that learned how to rise without destroying itself. Portugal is no longer the same. But it remains that country which, on 25th of April, dared to imagine itself different, and succeeded. Because there were soldiers who refused to kill. Because there was a flower seller who did not hesitate to give what she had. Because there was a people who took to the streets not to fight, but to embrace. Because there was music. And because there was love. The Carnation Revolution did not end. It lives on. Every time someone chooses freedom over fear. Words over shouting. A flower over a gun. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed learning about this extraordinary event, please consider subscribing for more videos about forgotten moments in history. There are countless stories like this one, brief, fascinating, and full of lessons about power, ambition, and humanity. Until next time, I'm your narrator, and this was When Portugal Chose Flowers Over Bullets, the Carnation Revolution.